and there's no question where it comes from. We have to sit back and say, look, do we want to have a future for our children and grandchildren, or don't we? And if we do, we've got to do some things, many of which, almost all of which, are a sacrifice of some sort, because we have to change what we've been doing, and what we've been doing is the easiest thing to do. So now we've got to decide, do we want to keep generating energy inefficiently? Do we want to keep using an enormous amount of energy that we might not need? And those are decisions that, unfortunately, every country has to make and can make them differently. The trouble, of course, is that whatever pollution or lack of pollution that this country produces or doesn't produce affects everybody all around the world. And so one country can help, and they will help everybody. But if everybody doesn't help, it's probably not doable to prevent a cataclysmic termination or ending. And is it real? Just ask people in the West where they're having record high temperatures and a drought, or people in the Gulf Coast where they're having record storms, or farmers and fishermen. People have to change their lives.
You talk about sacrifices, but given what you're telling us right now of the risks that climate change poses,
yes,
what are some of the opportunities that are out there, especially for the private sector?
Well, I'm a believer that the private sector is the only one that can do anything. I'm very skeptical that governments can do things. Governments aren't good at implementing things. And particularly with social media, people don't listen to governments the way they used to. But the truth of the matter is that it's not an either or. If you are a human being, family, or a company or whatever, if you improve the climate, you will reduce your expenses. People will live longer. They'll be able to do other things, buy other things, create other things. So this false choice between doing something about climate change and having a good economy is just made up by people that don't want to change. And I think that if you said to me, what are you doing that's improved your life with climate change? Well, I breathe better. I have less pollutants going into my body, so I'm going to live longer. And I care very much about living longer, quite honestly. So that's, if I have to make a sacrifice, I'm getting something back for it.
Given those considerations, does that mean that you're optimistic that business leaders will make that choice, will actually take into account climate when making those business decisions?
I don't think there's any question that a lot of businesses are doing that every single day. The question is, will all businesses or a majority of the businesses do it? What's really happening here, no matter what the government says, companies are driven by capitalism, not by the government. Government doesn't like to hear that, but that's the truth. And so if the owner or manager of a company gets complaints from her or his customers, or her or his employees, or her or his investors saying, we want you to do something else, they listen and they change. And you can see it in America. We closed coal-fired power plants at the same rate during Donald Trump's administration as we did during Barack Obama's administration. Why? Because the government doesn't have very much to do with coal-fired power plants. When renewables became more efficient and it made sense, and you were being pressured by your investors and customers and neighbors and whatever, companies changed and they closed their coal-fired power plants and moved to renewables.
They want to change, but do they have all of the information that they need to make those decisions? Why is measuring and disclosing climate risk so important?
Well, one of the ways to pressure a company is to say your pollutants, your climate-friendly behavior is more or less than another company. You have to be able to compare. And so there are organizations, we happen to support a couple of them and fund a couple of them, but there are ways in the whole ESG world where everybody's talking about this to say, look, you're not doing as good a job as the other company, and I'm a stockholder in your company, and I want you to do this, and I can show you because of this measure that you're not doing what you could do, whether you like it or not. We have a saying at Bloomberg, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so being able to concretely say you are or you aren't doing something is it's in everybody's interest, because otherwise you're just going to get bombarded. Even when you do the right thing, you can't win. So this way, at least if you do the right thing, you can.
You chair the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Tell us a little bit about the progress that you're making on actually achieving a global standard there.
Well, there are plenty of companies that are starting to pay attention, providing data. We have all sorts of customers that want us to provide the data, and they want to be able to compare it and contrast it and look at the stock price of a company that's doing it or not doing it, and seeing whether more people go to that company or less people and that sort of thing. So that's our business of measuring things and giving you the information and letting you do things with it, like compare or contrast or draw a graph or a table or whatever the case may be. And I don't think there's any company, if they're at all intelligent, that doesn't understand that they are or are not contributing to global warming. You just go out and look at the smokestack, and if you have stuff billowing out, not good. On the other hand, if it's clean, it's probably much better. Maybe not perfect. We're not going to go and stop using energy. We're not going to go and clean the air totally. And we don't have to do that. What we have to do is stop the vast bulk of the stuff we're putting in the air, which encourages climate change. And climate change is one of those things that if you get a little, it works on creating more. So if we warm the planet a little bit, let's say the tundra in Siberia softens, the ice melts, and out comes methane. If you didn't do the first, you wouldn't have the second. So these things can build one on top of another.
It's really interesting when we're talking about measuring and comparing apples to apples, that this is really necessary, because all of these clean investments, sustainable solutions, they're green, but there are different shades of green, right? So how important is it for this solution, this standard, to be uniform around the world?
Well, it's better if everybody does the right thing. We can obviously live if most do it, but not everybody, because that's the best you're going to get anyways. Nothing's ever perfect. You're never going to get all that much. But I think that as technology is also starting to play a part, because the better technology is in renewables, for example, the more you can generate with renewables and the less it costs to install, the better we're going to be. And there's no ways at the moment to capture carbon that comes out of a coal-fired power plant, but eventually maybe we will have that technology as well. We make our cars and trucks more fuel efficient because people want to save money. They don't want to spend as much money, but also because they won't pollute. And even the public understands this. And a lot of people care enough to say, I'm going to change, even though it's annoying, even though I may have to spend a little bit more, change my car in for another one. I want to be part of it.
One country that has a very ambitious target when it comes to renewable energy, of course, is India.
Yes.
Why is India so important in the fight against climate change?
India is either the first or the second largest country in the world, and if it isn't the largest today, it's going to be tomorrow with their growth rates, which are greater than China's. India is a very big country physically as well. So, the more people you have, the more you're likely to generate pollutants.
India is one of those countries that has been really badly hit by the pandemic, as have other developing economies. Yes. How do they balance the economic recovery and also investing in green solutions?
Well, government's first responsibility, I think, is to keep people alive. and whether that means reducing pollutants in the air so that you don't have heat waves that kill people and kill crops so they can't eat and that sort of thing, or it means making things more efficient so they can get vaccines and measure whether it works or not, all those kinds of things. That's part of what governments are supposed to do. And it's just not true to say, well, if we do those things, we're going to hurt our economy. Those are the things that are going to take you from a developing country to a developed country. Those are the things that you have to do, make government more efficient so that people can have better food and better medicine and more opportunities and be able to move and have vacations and all of the things that we all love. Developed countries don't have as much of that as developed countries. And India is one of these giants, but it and China as well have enormous numbers of people who haven't been able to share and are living in conditions that aren't optimal for their health and well-being and happiness. And it's the government's responsibility to fix that.
It's really interesting when we speak to colleagues in India or in China that during the pandemic and the virus restrictions, the air has become so much cleaner. And it seems to be hitting people and public perception that
yes, we've been telling them this for a long time. Da, as the kids would say.
When you talk about climate change, though, sometimes it feels very macro, right? It feels like goals and ambitions that take decades to achieve.
In New York City, you can take a blank piece of paper, draw an X and a Y axis, and plot where the kids that go to hospitals with asthma attacks live. And when you get done, you'll have a map of the major roads going through the city, because the pollutants of traffic stuck with at rush hour in the air get into people's lungs, and young kids are susceptible and they get asthma attacks and they go to the hospital, and we ask, where do you live? And you can see.
Whether it's in New York City or Delhi or Beijing, how important is the role that cities play in actually
Well, cities are where the people
change?
are. Cities are where the pollution is. Now, or the solution to the pollution is. It may be you generate electricity 100 miles away, but the electricity is used in the cities. So the first thing to reduce the pollution from 100 miles away is to use less electricity. Now, in a developed country like the United States, turning off your air conditioner when you go out in the morning and not turning it back on until you get home in the evening saves an enormous amount of electricity, reduces an enormous amount of pollution. In India, where they don't have that much air conditioning, that's not something, but you can look for things like that, making the trains more efficient or automobiles more efficient. In India, Modi had said he wants to get all electric cars. That's fine, but how are you going to generate the electricity? If you generate it from renewables, it really does save, and saves an enormous number of lives, and the people in India will live happier and longer lives, okay? But if you generate the electricity in the electric car elsewhere in a polluting way, then it's just worse than if you didn't do anything.
Some of those clean energy investments, though, have seen setbacks during the pandemic as a lot of the funds have been diverted elsewhere. How confident are you?
Well, you have to go back.
The recovery will.
You will go back. Number one, you get over the. We'll eventually vaccinate everybody. It's really terrible that some countries have lots of vaccine and some countries don't, and some countries know how to distribute it efficiently and quickly and saving a lot of lives, and others don't. Maybe this is a good wake-up lesson for every country to take a look and see if there's another virus coming along. What didn't work? In America, all we had to do was to give the vaccines to the drugstores. And every drugstore gives you a flu shot. If you want a flu shot, you just walk in, they go, boom, that's it. You could do the same thing here. Our government wasn't smart enough to do that, and took a long time before they got to it. Now, it wasn't the federal government, it was the state governments, and some states did better than others. But we know what to do. It's just a question of doing it. And some countries are less have a greater curve, a greater requirement to go up the curve than others. India is as you said before, a developing country. There's still an enormous amount of poverty. Same thing in China. America, we don't have that. We are a developed country. But I guess that says that the challenges for the government in those two big countries is greater, but also the opportunity to make a difference is greater. They can save an awful lot more lives by doing something right now. And you know what to do. You just have to have the political will of the people, and that's what a leader's job is. You need a strong leader to convince the public what's the right thing to do and to be willing to sacrifice, because change is tough. And if you're a good leader, you can do that. And if you're a bad leader, you can't. And some countries elect good leaders, some countries elect bad leaders, sometimes leaders change for the better or for the worse. But I'm a big believer that it's companies that are going to reduce pollution, and it's the government's job is to stand up and lead the people and say, okay, we're going to get up and we're going to charge together. And this is what we're going to do. This is the right thing to do, even if it isn't politically popular. And a good leader does that.
I think this is a perfect spot to take a pause, and we will get to the audience questions now.
My name is Sham Nirupam, and I'm a student from Brunel University in second year studying business and management. I'm from Mumbai in India. My question is, how do you think young people can engage with the climate change issues? What can they do to create a meaningful impact?
Well, young people have a lot more, like you, have a lot more to gain from climate change being stopped than people my age. I'm not going to be around, but you're going to be around for an awful lot longer. You won't remember my name many years from now, but you are going to have to live with whatever we do today to the atmosphere and to the land and to the oceans. All of these things have a lot to do. Young people have an enthusiasm. What young people lack is an understanding of the complexity of change. And they say, oh, government should just do something. And then when they take a look and see in the details, it's just not that easy. Number one, if you have a democracy, you can't just walk in and say, do something. But even if you had a totalitarian government, there's no one right answer, and where you fix one thing here, you may destroy it elsewhere. And the solution to that problem is young people just have to get better educations. The world's getting much more complex, much more dependent on science, much more vulnerable to things like vaccines that can travel easily now around the world where they couldn't before. And I think if we can do anything for our young people, it is to improve their education. And unfortunately, we are not doing that in a world of social media and a world where to be successful in life, you have to have a better education than before. And you have to know more about science, you have to know more history, you have to know more about civics in order to get things done. And our school systems, unfortunately, are going in the wrong direction, certainly in America.
And our last audience question.
Hi, my name is Percy Asare Ansan, the CEO of Premier Health Insurance, a leading private health insurance company in Ghana. In 2009, high-income countries made a commitment to scale up their commitment on climate finance to at least 100 billion USD per year by 2020. What do you think needs to be done to ensure that the target is actually met? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I think it is just the leadership of the countries being unwilling to stand up and to fight against those who don't want any change in what we do. There are people who are selfish enough to say, I don't care. I want right now to enjoy my life. I want to drive a fuel inefficient car. I want to burn stuff. I want whatever I'm doing. I don't want to have to make any sacrifices. And it is the younger people who are going to suffer because they're the ones that we're leaving the future to. And the future is being determined right now. And we've gotten to the point where at the rate of the increase in temperature, it could easily get to a place where it's not reversible. It will just keep feeding on itself. And that, if you think about what science says is going to happen, is not a world you want to be in. You don't want to have your kids in it either.